Madam President, I have repeatedly come down here to the Senate floor to talk about our budget issues. Just earlier this morning, talked about my 18th waste of the week, this looking at waste, fraud, and abuse in terms of government spending and waste of taxpayers' dollars. The first 4 years of this six-year term that I'm enjoying and participating in, I was consumed with the issue of our continuing deficit spending and increasing national debt. I was part of a group working directly with the president in an effort for many months and his top people to reach an agreement on how to address our long-term budget situation. It is no secret that under this administration, the national debt has almost doubled. Staggering to think that over the 230 or 40 years of the life of this country, we have gone from $10 trillion to approaching now $19 trillion of debt. And it's going to have consequences. As chairman of the Joint Economic Committee, we recently released some information entitled 6 Things to Know About Congressional Budget Office Long-Term Budget Outlet. Now, this is something we spent a great deal of time debating years ago, but it's fallen under the radar. We're obviously dealing with issues that are important. This Iran deal that has just been signed by the administration deserves intense concentration and consideration in terms of how we address this. The continuing economic malaise and slow recovery from the recession, any number of issues, highway funding and health care and so forth. These are all important issues. But underlying all this is a fundamental issue that has not been addressed, and if not addressed, is going to have significant adverse consequences for the American people, not just for future generations, but even our own generation. And so I keep trying to bring us back to this gorilla in the room here that we ignore, thinking that, well, we'll deal with it later. It's been passed on and so-called can kick down the road from election after election through different presidents, all the time gaining more and more consequences, negative consequences for the American people. So our Joint Economic Committee just released recently 6 things to know about the Congressional Budget Office Long-Term Budget Outlook. Number 1, the U.S. cannot rely on borrowing forever. I mean, this is not a complex issue here. If you continue to borrow more money and don't pay your bills, eventually the tax collector is at the door. And with the tax collector being at the door, this means that eventually investors are going to demand higher and higher interest rates, which is going to, because we don't have the confidence that the United States is going to be able to pay its bills. Secondly, mandatory spending skyrockets. We've all known that the spending for Medicare, Medicaid, and entitlements is just running amok, and it needs to be addressed on a long-term fix. Third, our debt burden threatens national security. CBO projects, the large amount of debt could also compromise national security by constraining defense spending in times of international crisis or by limiting the country's ability to prepare for such crisis. Look at the world today. It's aflame. And yet we're cutting our defense at historically low rates of readiness and in terms of dealing with this. And so while the threat increases daily, while the threat is right there before us, we are slashing our spending on defense and national security because we can't afford it, because the entitlements are eating all this up. Number 4, bankruptcy looms for Social Security. We stand here and pretend like everything's fine. Everybody's going to continue to receive their Social Security checks, no problem. CBO projects bankruptcy looms for Social Security. The report that just came out from the trustees basically said that within a relatively short period of time, Social Security is going to hit bankruptcy. What does that mean? That means dramatic cuts in Social Security benefits to people who have counted on using Social Security to help for their retirement. or dramatic tax increases to cover the deficit. Now, there's a portion of Social Security, the Social Security disability benefits, that the trustees said is going broke next year. We're in 2015, halfway through, more than halfway through, and next year, by the end of 2016, Social Security disability fund is going bankrupt. That is what has been said here, and if you don't trust my words, read the New York, not my favorite newspaper, but one that usually gets its facts, not always, right? The New York Times today has a major article, Social Security disability benefits face cuts in 2016. Let me quote a couple things that is said in that paper on this issue. 11 million people face a deep, abrupt cut in disability insurance benefits in late 2016 if Congress fails to replenish Social Security's Disability Trust Fund, which is running out of money. That was issued by the administration. Officials expressed concern about the program as they issued their annual report on the financial condition of Medicare and Social Security, which together account for 40% of all federal spending. The trustees of Social Security said that the fund, Disability Trust Fund, would be depleted in the last quarter of 2016, that then benefits would automatically be cut by 19% because revenues, largely from payroll taxes, would be sufficient to cover only 81% of scheduled benefit payments. Folks, we've been warning about this for years, not doing anything about it, and we now have this report from the trustees who oversee these funds, and the report is published by the New York Times today, say this thing is going broke next year and cuts will be 19% because we don't have the money to pay for it. You'd think the alarm bells would be sounding. You'd think we would be finally understanding that we're hitting the wall on spending. That finally we have to step up and do something about runaway entitlement mandatory spending, or everybody's going to pay the price. To add one more point here from the New York Times, the trustees in their report said that the squeeze on the disability program was, and I quote, but the first manifestation of larger financial imbalances facing Social Security as a whole, as well as Medicare. Where is the AARP? Where are the people in retirement who say, don't touch a penny of my Social Security or Medicare benefits, when the trustees say, don't worry, we won't have to touch a penny of them. The program is going broke on its own. And for all of us who have been pleading to do something to address this issue, it's not even being talked about. And yet, if anybody who comes down to the floor here and says this kind of stuff is immediately pillared by the AARP. Oh, they're going to go off and cut our Social Security. No, it's going to automatically happen because we haven't addressed the issue. So don't criticize us for trying to address an issue that's going to cut your benefits by 19% or by cause the program to go broke. Support those who have the courage to stand up and say, folks, we've got to do something about this. If you want to continue to guarantee Social Security benefits when people retire, or give them Medicare coverage when they retire and need it, something has to be done now, or there are going to be massive cuts. That's not just a Republican standing up and conservative standing up saying we're spending too much money and we got to cut back on that. This is the trustees who oversee the programs are warning us, saying you got to do something or everybody's going to take not just a haircut, but a major cut. Well, let's see, a couple of other things that came out here on our budget term outlook. The federal debt has nearly doubled since President Obama was elected. It now stands at 74% of the economy. The federal debt has nearly doubled since the president was elected. What a legacy. Why in the world would a president of the United States with the responsibility to oversee the fiscal basis of what makes this country work and to commit to people that they will address problems as they occur? You know, if this was a private business, Madam President, it would be in bankruptcy. Nobody would buy the stock of this business. Nobody would buy bonds of this business. Nobody would invest in this business because it's totally dysfunctional and it's totally going broke. And yet it's the federal government, and they got printing presses down in the basement, and they keep cranking out dollars as that devaluates their value to cover our debts, and they continue to tell people, don't go ahead and loan money to the states, and we're going to keep taking your taxes also, but buy our bonds because don't worry, we'll pay them back. Not at this rate. So we're heading toward the wall, we're in the crisis, and we're really not doing anything about it. Now, point number 6 and the last point, hopefully CBO, Congressional Budget Office, made correct assumptions. So their warnings here are based on assumptions that hopefully we will take some efforts and prevent some of this. But if they're off by just 3/4 of a 1 percentage point, it has a dramatic change from raising the federal debt to 111% of the economy by 2039 to 159% of the economy. You know who has those numbers? Greece. Japan is careening toward that catastrophe. But if you want to see a model of what happens, if you want to see an example of what happens to a country that allows its debt to run unchecked and to become hit the 100% mark of its total economy, just take a look at what's happening in Greece. None of us want to see that happen. But we have far too little alarm bells sounding in this country because it is happening. And this isn't just Republican propaganda or conservative propaganda. This is the Congressional Budget Office. It's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's totally neutral. It's math. It's numbers. It has nothing to do with ideology. It has everything to do with numbers that ought to be driving us to be dealing with this issue, standing up to our constituents and saying, regardless of the political consequences, folks, just do the math. It's pretty simple math. If we don't do something, everyone is going to pay the price. And for those organizations, and I call out AARP, that scare people with mail and phone calls and everything else saying, they're going to cut your Social Security. They're going to take some money away from your disability benefits. That's not what we want to do. We want to guarantee what we have promised to people. But if we don't take these actions, it'll automatically happen. And so we need the support of everybody who has concern, not just about my generation who are retiring in record numbers, but about the future for our children and grandchildren. What is this country going to be if we can't take these steps? So I get exercised about this. That's why I came back. It's the only reason why I decided to run for the Senate again, or one of the two main reasons. I was worried about terrorist attacks and the marriage of, the nightmare of a marriage between weapons of mass destruction and terrorist groups impacting our country and the world. But while we seem to be struggling to address the terror issue and having some success, at least we're aware of it on a daily basis, we're letting this fiscal crisis just go by without even talking about it. And so I think everybody's exhausted. We've had exhausting exchanges. We've had bipartisan Democrats and Republicans working together, pleading with the president in the White House, starting with Simpson-Bowles, a bipartisan effort, the Gang of Six, a bipartisan effort, the Committee of 12, the Super Committee, bipartisan effort. I was part of the dinner group, an effort pleading with the president. Let's do something together to address this problem, and being turned down time after time after time. And now we're sailing toward the end of this presidency, and obviously nothing's going to be done, even though the Social Security Trust Fund is going to expire on the president's watch. Oh, they'll come up with some gimmick, they'll shift some money around and so forth, just putting us further in debt, just kicking the can down the road. They got to cover this because politically they won't allow this to happen, but they're going to do it in a way that makes our situation even worse. So as the president careens toward retirement and his legacy, one of them is going to be come back to be responded to by people for years and years in the future. Why didn't we do something when we had the chance on a bipartisan basis with support from both parties? Why was the president so adamant about not doing anything to address this problem? And so time's running out. Social Security disability will collapse under the president's leadership here before he escapes at the end of 2016. You can tell how frustrated I am, but I'm going to keep coming down here, keep talking about this stuff, and hopefully, well, we don't want it to happen under crisis. We don't want to be days away from bankruptcy, so we move some money around in the federal budget and so forth and so on, take it from Peter to pay Paul, and put us further in debt, and then kick the can down the road. And boy, I feel for the next president, whoever that might be, they're going to get a can of worms because we didn't do anything about this during this tenure.